So welcome. Thank you very much for coming to our first of our three-part lecture series. We have Gordon Naylor here, as you know, and I'll let him begin his talk now. He is talking tonight on youth mental health and happiness. I think that's a subject that's more important now than ever with our struggle through COVID. We have some principals from other schools, and I notice a few educators. We welcome everyone. We have a couple parents, and we have some friends that are here as well. So enjoy your evening. Please put your questions. You don't have to hold them to the end. Just put them in the sidebar. We ask everybody to keep their mics muted until the talk is finished. Then I will ask Mr. Naylor the questions that we have time for you, and he'll answer those. So welcome and thank you for coming. Go ahead, Gordon.
Good evening, everyone. So nice to be here with you. I'm looking forward to tonight. I'm going to be presenting some slides as well as we go along. And I thought the first, this issue of mental health, I thought the first step might be just for us to kind of think about the challenges that are facing us right now. There's a lot of people, pretty much everyone has been kind of locked down. And that creates a great deal of stress for people. It challenges us to think in new ways about how we're going to deal with these difficulties. And I know that everyone has been as creative as possible. Probably this has been an interesting thing from the point of view of having time for reflection. And then of course, as human beings we adapt very quickly. And we start figuring out how we can get things done regardless of what's happening. And so, of course, along comes our Zooming talents and capacities, which come in and allow us to take part in gatherings all over and meet people and talk. And that's, I'm sure, been a source of well-being for a lot of people. But then, of course, as it ramps up, it starts also creating its own set of stresses. Some of the number one health difficulties, mental health difficulties all over the world are accelerated by these problems, but also challenge us to figure out new ways to deal with them. So I thought maybe I'd just start with a bit of a world overview, actually, of what the state of affairs is, what are the kind of number one mental health issues that the world is dealing with. And I thought I would start by sharing my screen. So let us take a moment while I become capable of doing that so we can see the screen, and hopefully also you'd be able to see myself as well. So we're okay. So the first one is youth mental health and happiness. And of course, the statistics we're going to present obviously are not recent statistics, but they're statistics that were from 2017, 2018, because they're world statistics and it takes time to gather them. But nonetheless, we'll understand about those problems and kind of the spread, some interesting facts. So this is a quotation that I think is a really valuable quotation in terms of our theme tonight, which is we cannot segregate the human heart from the environment outside us and say that once one of these is reformed, everything will be improved. Man is organic with the world. His inner life molds the environment and is itself also deeply affected by it. The one acts upon the other, and every abiding change in the life of man is the result of these mutual reactions. So it's this importance of environment and the importance of each one of us and how that interaction takes place and, of course, reforms and changes and creates. So we could say that our big thought might be that man's reality is his thought, and it's kind of how we think about things that shape the reality of what's going to happen. So this is a challenge for us to rise above conditions sometimes that are extremely difficult so that we'd be able to share. We can see from this chart that the number one issue, mental health issue in the world really is anxiety disorders. It's surpassed depression, which is the next one. Alcohol use disorders, which is pretty high up there. Drug use disorders is the next. Bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and eating disorders. And so the spread, we're going to just kind of do a bit of an overview of these. You can see anxiety disorders affect about 4%, almost 4% of the population. And, you know, depression is about 3.5% of the population, which some people might think is small, but we're talking about a mental health disorder. Probably every individual goes through periods of reactive depression, which might be from a loss of something, but we're talking about these as more profound disorders when we're doing statistics. So these would have been reported by medical facilities throughout the world. So you can see from this one, the share of the population with depression. It's of interest to note that the darker colors are the countries where depression is more severe. United States, Greenland is really one of the countries that's very hard hit. The Middle East, there's quite a bit. Australia is another. Canada, less depression, although somebody might have thought there's quite a bit given our cold weather, but and how dark it gets in the winter. But the fact is that's the spread throughout the world. So the next one is the anxiety disorders. You can see North Americans are pretty high up in the anxiety disorders. Brazilians, Chileans, Australians, Middle Easterners, Europeans. So it looks like it's, you know, we can't just say it's a Western phenomena, but it's pretty Western in this whole issue of anxiety. And very often anxiety is associated with, you know, having to produce and the sort of tensions involved with a very competitive kind of environment where expectations rise and people can't find themselves able to meet them. So we'll go to the next slide, which talks to us about mental and substance use disorders as a share of the total disease burden, which we already showed you what that was. And again, you can see which countries are more severely hit. For addictions, the Middle East ones are quite strong, and so is Australia, Europe, the northwestern part of Africa. North America is kind of in the middle with those issues. If you're from North America and you know a lot of people that are suffering with addiction disorders, you can see this is kind of the spread of those diseases and the problems with them. So of interest to our particular population as a high school, adolescence is typically the stage of life where mental health disorders tend to become more apparent. The risk factors and contributors to well-being in childhood apply equally to those in adolescence. In addition, several other contributing factors appear. It is in the years of adolescence that the use of substances, including alcohol and drugs, first appear. Substance use is particularly hazardous and harmful for adolescents because individuals are still developing both mentally and physically. Peer pressure and media influences also become more prominent over these years. Exposure to substance use is not only an important risk factor for other mental health disorders, but also is linked to poorer educational outcomes, more risky sexual behavior, and increased exposure to violence and conflict. So very often the use of substances is a cause of kind of moral decline and poor judgment, and it leads to several other problems, as was mentioned here. And I thought we should particularly bring that to our attention. Now, the interesting thing, the big concept that I wanted to try to get across tonight was the remembering that the adults create the parameters for youth, educational and social environments. I remember I was in one country and they said, our youth are becoming very problematic. They're really spoiled and having difficulties. It was a country where what I said had to be translated. And I remember in thinking about it, I said to them, it's too bad that you have done that to them. And they actually thought it was a translation error. And they asked me, you know, what I meant. And I said, Well, you have to think about the fact that we're the ones that create the educational programs. We're the ones that have the funds to fund the programs. We're the ones that are responsible for the environments as the adults. So it doesn't seem appropriate for us to be blaming the youth for the outcomes of our education process. And in fact, if we are not succeeding at what it is we are trying to achieve, which would be to educate our youth, then we need to really think again and strive to achieve it. When I started Nancy Campbell Academy, I made very clear to the teachers that we were going to be in a learning mode of operation. We would have to try some things, see whether or not it works. And we identified that our goal at the school was to create wise individuals that would have good judgment, would know the difference between what is right and wrong, and would be able to work out complex moral dilemmas and make wise decisions, whether it be for themselves or for others, because both are interconnected. And that's the part that is talking that we said at the very beginning, that you can't segregate the human heart from the environment around it. So when I do something, it affects the environment around, and that environment is affected by me, and I am affected by that environment. So I must be responsible for that environment. So when the school began, every Friday afternoon, I would gather the teachers and the staff together, and we would consult about whether or not the students were demonstrating the things that we were hoping for. Were they demonstrating wise judgment? Were they developing in their capacity to understand deeply human problems? Were they able to see that they had a role in making a difference? These were big questions that we had to ask ourselves. And then I also made very clear to the staff that we were not going to blame the students for what we were not seeing. In fact, we were the ones that were responsible. And if something wasn't happening the way we thought should be happening, then we must change our programs, our contingencies, our plan, our education to make sure that they would be inspired and raise up to a higher level of commitment, interest in their academics, and capacity to achieve what their potential was. So that was always our focus. So it made for very different meetings, because you did start your meetings by identifying how things were going, what were the problem areas, but the purpose of labeling a problem area or identifying it was not to fix blame on students, but it was to decide, okay, if that is a problem area, what would be a viable, possible solution? And out of that question would come, what kind of programs or timing or structures could we institute that would make a difference? Because structure is one of the very important things that creates good mental health, but that structure has to be flexible and has to release human potential, not oppress human potential. It's a bit like, when somebody was asking, how do you keep your spouse in your marriage? One young lady was asking her mother, and her mother picked up a handful of sand and said, you have to support this. You don't do this. So it's a very interesting challenge to give the right amount of structure for support, but not try to control to the level that you squeeze the life out of things. And it's very interesting to think about when students go to school, what is their wish? What do they go for? As opposed to what you might think they're coming for. And then how do we give them what it is that makes them happy and joyful and inspired and wanting to learn? And we're going to talk about that more as we go on. So happiness, as to spiritual happiness, this is the true basis of the life of man. For life is created for happiness, not for sorrow, for pleasure, not for grief. And I want to share this definition of what I regard as the definition of spiritual. And it's something that Hussein Dinesh had identified once in a talk that I heard from him, and I thought this is the right definition that I like, which was that which gives meaning to life. So all of us are, by our natures, because we have our minds and our hearts and our souls, we're always striving and searching for meaning in our life. This is the quest of human beings wherever they live. How to have a meaningful life. What is it that gives meaning? And we make different decisions about what we think is meaningful. Sometimes we prioritize doing something so that we can bring about the possibility of reaching that meaning. And sometimes we go after something that we think will facilitate us reaching that meaning. And sometimes we get lost in that. Other times we decide we're not making it and we decide to drown the meaning. And we do that through addictions and other things. So this quest for our happiness is rooted in our value system and in our beliefs. And in reality, true happiness comes from being of service to others, this interrelated dynamic, but we're going to talk more about that. So if we look at the state of the world right now, we could see that there is placed out there, there's this message that we're seeking comfort versus subjecting ourselves to meaningful hardship to be of service. So if we think that the purpose of our life is to make ourselves and our loved ones as comfortable as possible, then we take a certain set of actions. And if we believe that the purpose of life is to be free of suffering and difficulties, then we take a different sort of action. But if I ask you this question, let's say you were seeking comfort and you were seeking not to suffer, have you been successful? How many people have not suffered? How many people would say that their life has not been difficult? So perhaps the assumption is really what is wrong. Our purpose is not to seek just our comfort, but our purpose is to really be willing to subject ourselves to difficulties to achieve things that improve the common good. So if we think about education, what is the goal of education? For me, the goal of education is to inspire youth to want to serve the common good. And in order to do so, they must develop wise judgment, learn about their capacities and capabilities, and strive to be able to contribute them in action, not just in thought and word, but in deed. And it doesn't matter what the chosen path of service is. In other words, whether you become a doctor or a lawyer or an artist or whatever other form of vocation you might feel moved to be involved in. It does matter that you think about that as a service and as a contribution to the well-being of your fellow human beings. And as you achieve and start to create that, what starts to happen is a real feeling of fulfillment. The moment that you've had difficulties in creating something for the world, whether it be as small as a small service to someone else, or as great as a wonderful piece of art or work of art or some other service, then when all of that happens, you feel more evolved, more developed, more capable, and you get inspired to want to do more. So if we think about that, we realize that our source of motivation for learning actually comes from our capacity to be willing to make a contribution. And what's happening in a crisis of education that's going on now and mental well-being is people have disconnected the meaning and purpose of learning from the meaning and purpose of their life. And when those things are reconnected, then you find motivation for learning intensifies. The other principle that we want to talk about is reciprocity and cooperation versus isolation, competition, and apathy. If we don't realize that we are social beings that must collaborate with each other, be reciprocal in trying to help each other, and try to make a difference in each other's lives, then society starts to crumble, starts to fall apart. And it really doesn't matter what crisis we're serving or who it is that we're working with. The same things are required, reciprocity and cooperation versus isolation. In fact, isolation is one of the major factors in addiction. So the more a child or a youth or an adult isolates, the more likely it is they would become involved in addiction issues. In fact, if you become involved in addiction issues, the more you strive to isolate. Because in a sense, you could say that those issues are the result of an approach that's quite different. Now, materialism is a tremendous force that's affecting us, that allows us to feel that we should be totally comfortable or else something's wrong with the world. And what materialism does is it makes us feel entitled, that I'm entitled for you to look after me. I'm entitled for you to make me feel good. I'm entitled for my parents to make me feel good. This sense of entitlement is the result of materialism, and which is essentially causing us to become more and more self-centered. If we think about it from the point of view, there's lots of studies, one in particular I'll mention. They gave students in British Columbia in the university, one group of students, they gave $20 and they said, you could just spend this on yourself, just do what you like with it. And they gave another group the same $20 and they said to them, you have to spend this money on someone else in your efforts to make them happy. 1 month later, they brought the students back. The students that had spent it on themselves simply said, well, it was nice to have $20. It was, it didn't really do this or that. But the group that got the $20 and had to spend it on others reported tremendous feelings of well-being, that they were happy that they had made someone happy, that the other person really appreciated what they did. And it was a nominal amount of money, but it made a huge difference in the outcomes of how the person that was doing the giving, the thinking about what to do, had felt, because they were trying to be of some service to someone else. So there's many, many examples, a lot of research, so much research if you go on the internet, about the importance of being of service to others and how that inspires you. So reciprocity, cooperation, and more importantly, service is what helps us to really develop strong mental well-being. Psychological pressure to conform versus healthy boundaries that create autonomy and growth. This is a major problem in education and in child rearing, that we often believe that we're not psychologically pressuring our kids. We often believe that we are open, or maybe we don't believe that. Maybe we believe that we have the right to pressure them. Societies pressure people to conform to certain things. Neighborhoods pressure people to conform. And although structure is something that's beneficial for healthy well-being, oppression comes from too much psychological pressure to people to conform, as opposed to healthy boundaries or guidelines that help civilized people live together, that create autonomy and growth. We need order in society to be able to create a space that is safe for all of us to develop, but we shouldn't be trying to control all the outcomes. We should be trying to have children and youth develop autonomy in decision-making, and the older the child gets, the older the youth gets, the more autonomy they have to have. And they cannot be asked to meet the requirements that we have for them, as much as healthy boundaries for good living and also their own goals. So the key to having healthy well-being is this, what you see on your screen now: inspiring movement and motivation for learning through service. If we strive to be of service to others, it takes us out of ourself. It allows us to think about the well-being of others and what they need. And small children, as well as older youth, have to be trained from early on that their parents are not machines, that they have things that they need, and that the child must develop thoughtfulness and caring for the well-being of their parent. Parents must not be overly needy to the point that they can't themselves look after themselves or demand unreasonable things, but they must be always conscious of the growth and well-being of their child, and the child must become capable of being of service. So as a parent or as an educator, we have a responsibility of inspiring this movement towards service. And motivation for learning comes about once service begins. Most significant changes, if you think back in your own life, when did I feel that I was capable of doing something? It's when we took a step of doing something. You can't create soldiers in classrooms, actually. You can't create people that are going to be of service by not having them be of service. And you don't wait to become a person to start your service. That starts very young, where you get the idea that I'm to be making a contribution towards this well-being. And when that happens, we start to grow. And so at the school, I would say this: we try to make the most inspiring activities and environments for service that we can come up with. We don't try to force kids to be of service. We try to inspire them. We try to inspire them to be creative in the type of service they'd like to give. And as students work together and develop closeness with each other, they develop a community that cares about the world. They don't let each other put each other down. They don't let each other be critical excessively towards each other. Of course, there's always some degree of that, but the goal is to have them really see themselves being a supportive community, encouraging the arts, encouraging the service, encouraging working capacity. And as they're very excited about their community and want to be together with their peers in a healthy environment where they can be their true selves, then they realize, of course, that they have to do academics and they have to do school as well. And they do that as well. But it's almost like something on the side, to be honest. They reach high levels of academic well-being because they are highly motivated to achieve them. And then because they care about their peers and they care about their teachers and they care about everyone in that environment, and the environment's size enough that they can know people, then they want to do well. They don't want to do poorly. So they're more motivated. And they try to help each other to do well, which is where the reciprocity and cooperation comes in. So then the mental well-being takes place. And although we've had COVID-19, the school only missed about 3 days of school. Then it went online with 45-minute Zoom classes for each class. The work is still being achieved. All of our students are going to be successful coming to June. We've kept our assemblies going by Zoom. We've kept our activities that we normally have to the degree that we could, so that we realize that the social, emotional, and meaningful environment has to be there to inspire the academics. And so we've tried to be very close as a community to keep it all going. So the last one I want to show you, which you'll be able to see, is these are risk factors that have to do with mental health and well-being. So adverse factors are in the first column. What are the individual attributes? So in the individual's case, what are the adverse factors and what are the protective factors? So you can see self-esteem, confidence, that's built by doing, by figuring out how to contribute, by figuring out how to make a difference, regardless of the constraints of the environment, including COVID-19's restraints. The ability to solve problems and manage stress or adversity. So building this capacity of problem solving. Students love moral dilemmas. They love to figure out problems. Communication skills, making them aware that it's so important that the communications keep up. We always say that through conversation, consciousness gets raised. And when consciousness gets raised, development starts to take place. So the communication is such an important thing for development of well-being. And of course, keeping physical health and fitness. We did online Olympics that they had to do so that we'd have a bit of reciprocity and competition for students to try to reach certain goals physically. And that was very important to keep that well-being. These are the protective factors. Social circumstances, you need social support of family and friends. You need good parenting, family interaction, conversation. Play games and do things that you can have good conversation while you're doing it. Physical security and safety. You know, if you weren't safe when we're talking about these things, you'd only be concentrating on your safety and not on what's being said. Of course, economic well-being, which will be a struggle, but children learning that it's a striving and struggling economic situation that we have to go is not a bad thing. They can see how we make circumstances work. Scholastic achievement, just because things have changed, we still have to be achieving our intelligence, satisfaction and success at work. Equality of access to basic services are environmental factors. Social justice and tolerance and integration, that's always a critical part of what we need to be able to count on. Otherwise, it blights human potential. And social and gender equality, of course, is absolutely vital so that the whole of the human race can develop. So we need to create environments that ensure these factors are there. When we put this together, it results in a state of happiness and meaning, because we've identified what is really meaningful, and then we strive. And I'd like to also say that there's good studies that indicate that prayer and meditation are very important factors in helping someone become resilient, if you believe. And if you don't believe in a creator or a God, then certainly inspirational quotes and meaningful poetry, things that uplift you. Music is another source. The arts are a source of being uplifted. We have to make sure we're having that upliftment happen in our lives. I think if we look at these factors, we start to see how to keep a healthy environment that inspires us. That's probably long enough.
Thank you, Mr. Naylor. I don't know if we...
Just go back to the picture.
Okay. So thank you. That was very informative and certainly not surprising to me. You're a wonderful speaker. I'm going to field some of the questions. We have some questions that have been being sent to us through email or text messages that are in the chat. So we'll start with the first question. It's, how do I make structure when my teen does not want to listen to me? I know my child loves me, but he is interested in the world around him and not what I have to say.
Well, it's good that you know that, first of all, that they are more interested in the world around them than what you have to say. In fact, I would say that most teenagers have memorized your speeches on almost every subject that you want to talk about. They might even have them numbered. And because we do have a way ourselves of saying, you know, the truths that we know and trying to think of new and creative ways to say them so we can keep their attention, and that's all important. But I think what we have to do in this regard is there's lots of ways to begin, to build a stronger relationship. One of the things that, I'll just give a few suggestions of things that could be done. I was saying to somebody the other day that if an adolescent knows that you want to get, like, let's say at the school, we want the students to do well academically, but we don't focus everything on students doing well academically. What we do is we focus building a positive, exciting, service-oriented environment that they want to be part of. And then in order, once they start to doing some kind of service, then they start to realize that they have capacities, that they have talents. And then they want to learn how to develop those. And so one would be to begin conversations that are really not with an agenda, conversations that are to understand what excites and interests your youth. What are they really interested in? What makes them truly excited? So you get a handle on that. Now, if that youth thinks that you're doing that so you can get an understanding and use that against them later, or bring it up in a bad way later, they're not going to tell you very much. And it may take them some time to actually trust that you really just genuinely want to know about them and understand and get more insight into what makes them excited. And the truth is, adolescence is a confusing time, and sometimes they don't even know what they are interested in. So in that case, we have to think about, is there something that's interesting? I'm just going to give you an example of that, because I work with, my other work is with treatment homes with youth that have difficulties and so on. Once we had a young man come to our agency, and we were going to have them, place them in a home. That young man had actually broken down every placement that he had in every home that he had. And he was a disaster in terms of no one wanted to serve him. And he came to Hats Off, which is the service agency that I have. And I remember thinking to myself, he actually doesn't want to do anything that an adult wants him to do when he first, just by knowing about him. So he came into my office, he was at the other end of my table. And I said to him, and I knew he was waiting for my speech. He'd had all the speeches before. So I said to him, I just want to take this moment to congratulate you because you are an outstanding individual. And he was not expecting that. And I said, you have successfully alienated every single person that wants to help you. In fact, right now in the province of Ontario, nobody wants you to come into their agency because your reputation of being able to break down every person that wants to help you is so successful. And that's not easy to do. I'm sure there were some really nice people that you had to, push aside and so on to be successful in what you're doing. And I said, you've taken a lot of energy to do that. Now you might think I'm giving you a very extreme example, but this is the God honest truth of what I said to him. Then he looked at me and I said to him, I just have one question that I want to ask you, which I hope that you'll answer. And he said, what's that? And I said, I just want to know if you're happy. Are you happy? Has this made you happy, what you've achieved so far? Because, you could probably blow through here as well. And of course, he didn't answer me, but he certainly wasn't happy. So I said, is there one thing, anything that you would like to learn or take part in or enjoy, any activity you want to do that you would like to commit to? Anything. And then I could see he still wasn't answering me. And I said, oh, I forgot. You're not going to give me an answer because you know that if you tell me that one activity and you come and live in my places, then we're going to take that away from you when you do something wrong, like everyone else has done so far, as you act out. And I said, so I'll tell you, if you tell me that one activity, we will never take that away from you, no matter what you do. You'll still get to do it. And then he looked somewhat interested. And I said, can you tell me what it is? Still silence. I said, oh, I forgot. There's another thing. And he looks at me and I said, the other thing is, you don't want to tell me that activity because you think if you start it, you're going to have to keep doing it. And I'm going to make you keep doing it. Just like when a kid wants to take piano and the mother makes them keep doing the piano until they never play piano again. So I said, that's not going to happen. I just want you to do it if you want to do something, you only have to do it, let's say, I hope you can do it 3 times. And then if you want to change it, that's fine, you can change it. So then he told me one thing that he wanted to do. And I said, okay, that's where we're starting. And as he did that, as he went into the program, he started changing because he was doing one thing successfully that was not being taken away from him. And because I acknowledged his power, because kids and adolescents have a lot of power to drive you crazy if they want to. So you want to be able to say, that's not the relationship I want, right? I want a relationship where we're able to talk about things. Maybe I don't agree with what you're saying, but this is what we have to do. I will always try to tell you what I think, but then I'll try not to nag you into submission. But once in a while I might get worried that you forgot what I said, so I might say it again, but I'm not going to nag you about it. I'm just going to let you know. So don't think if I don't keep saying it that I changed my mind. If you want to know if I changed my mind, ask me. Otherwise, assume that what I've said is what I still think. And you may be doing something else, but you need to bring your life in line with what is going to be healthy and good for you. And that's what I'm always going to tell you as your parent. You may want to go and do some other things, but there are issues, and I will be the first one to tell you what those issues are. And then I'm going to try not to nag you, but I'm not going to just accept them. And there's some things that if you do them and you're in this house, you won't be able to be in this house. So there's certain lines that you'll go over, and it won't matter who you are, you can't keep doing them. So we'll have to look at other solutions if that's the case. Again, I'm talking about extreme difficulties, but you are trying to build capacity and build relationship. Ultimately, you have to keep the communication going, no matter how upset and disturbed you are. You are the adult in the situation. You're the one that has to build the possibility of a bridge. And that's really what's required. I don't know if that's helpful.
Thank you. So the next question, we have time for another one and hopefully a third, depending on how long, but we have to be done in about 4 or 5 minutes. So depending on how long you feel this question will take, it is, how do you balance the happiness and choices of youth while avoiding the constructiveness approach to education?
Well, I think we've talked quite a bit about that question. And all I would say is that it's important to, I would go back to inspire them to do some kind of service, try to help them connect their opportunities with the need for learning. Because what's happened in education is we've disconnected learning from meaning, or learning from doing. And youth have to get the message that they have a contribution to make. That I even tell them, we've messed up the world significantly, so don't think we've done it well. But we need to work together to figure out how to make this work. We need everyone's good intention and contribution. So how would you like to contribute? And if they identify how they'd like to contribute, then you start connecting the learning that you want to see or that is necessary so that they can understand why they have to. That's a brief answer, but we only have 4 minutes after all.
Okay, so I'm understanding that you are saying to actually try to engage or involve them into service itself, like give family projects or whatever. That sort of leads into our next question, which is, how exactly do we inspire our teen to be more of service to others? Like, how do we actually get them involved and wanting to do it? Then a similar email that says, basically, you talked about when our kids are young, what they should know and what we should start early on. But in our case, my son's already 15, so I've missed that boat. I can't turn the clock back. If I have a 15-year-old who's showing me signs that he doesn't want to be involved, or I can honestly say I haven't ever asked him if he wanted to do service, but I've asked him to do things that he didn't necessarily want, is what he says.
Yeah. Okay, so what I would say about that is youth, if they're challenged, you know, like when they're coming to the school, one of the questions we ask them in their interview is, do you see yourself as someone that is going to help the world become better? That's a question. They might say yes, they might say no. And then if they say no, I'd say, well, then they never say no to me on that question. And but you know what they say next is they usually say, but I don't know how I would do that. Or I don't know how to be making a change in the world. And I'd say, well, that's not really your responsibility. That's the school's responsibility to work with you to create opportunities. But everyone has a creative mind. And if you look at, we want you to think about your own social reality. What's going on? What's going on in your community? What are you concerned about? And if you're concerned about something, then is there anything that could be done to make a contribution to improve it? Is it a conversation? What is it? So you help them kind of design something that connects to, again, what they're noticing. The ability, we develop the youth's ability at the school to read the social reality. What is the social reality you're working in? And we have kids from all over the world, and their social realities are very different. And then they come to Nancy Campbell, and it's another social reality. So how are we going to improve that? And then the community is another social reality. So we take some time to say, okay, what are the good things going on in the social reality that we are? What are the bad things? Get a read of this. Is there anything that really concerns you? Is there something you think that we should be changing? And then what could we do about it? It could be a small thing. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Every big thing starts with a small change, you know? And so how could we inspire something like that? So we really try to get them excited about their role through discussion. Number one, their role of diagnosing the social issue. And we'll work on that together, not acting like I know what the social issue is. The worst mistake parents make right now is they believe that high school is like it was when they went to it. It's nothing like it was when you went to it. And the anxieties and difficulties and stresses that people have are, quite different. So, if I put myself in a learning position with the youth, they have a lot of things to tell me. They'll tell me a whole bucket of things. Some I wish I didn't know. But the fact of the matter is, I can't be an ostrich and put my head in the sand. And if you can identify issues, then what of those issues are concerning you? And how would you like to think about whether we should change them? Can we change any of them? And as soon as I start to talk like this, like, I need your help, we need each other's help to do something about this, unless we want to just let it coast, then they get involved. And is there another youth that somebody else that's concerned about this? Can we figure out what we could do? And okay, we're all locked down in COVID-19. Is there something we can do online? Is there something we can do somewhere else? So service projects can start with words and can end in tremendous changes of attitude that result in changes in behavior. So we have to think about helping youth understand how change takes place. How do we solve problems? Stop accepting the problems the way that they are, and start realizing that no one's going to solve them and fix them except for us. So you can make a big difference just because you care about it. So what do you care about? Do you care about, and I don't care how apathetic the youth is, they have to care about something. You just have to have a more developed conversation. When they start to feel insecure, though, they might try to put you off and not have the conversation. Say, okay, well, let's talk about this later. Sometimes we watch a movie that brings up an issue, or a show. I think video therapy is wonderful, where you watch something and you say, that's an interesting thing that happened there. What do you think went on there? Like, how is that person thinking like that? And what should we do? These are tremendous opportunities to discuss moral dilemmas and challenges and privilege and things that people have and things that people don't have. The most powerful thing that we do in the school that changes our students the most is when we take them on the grade 11 service trip for 10 to 14 days in another country. They are never the same again. And they tell me that now they know what service is and they're never going to stop serving. So I know that if you can get them into the field of service, even their big toe, that they are going to start to change. And if they think that you believe in their ability to make a difference, that's the teacher that they want. That's the parent that they want. That's someone who thinks that they've got a valuable person that's going to make a contribution. And if you think about your own life, that's the teacher that changed you. The one that saw in you the potential to make a difference, that believed you could learn something and be something and make some difference. Those are the ones that inspired us. And they might have just done it with a look or a sentence or a conversation, but they did it. And I can think of their names and I can know them in my history, and I'm sure you do too.